What if I told you that the most dangerous criminal I ever faced wasn't caught during my 30 years as a detective, but 3 years after I hung up my badge? My name is Frank Morrison, and at 70 years old I thought my crime-fighting days were behind me. I was wrong, dead wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in October 2019. I was sipping my coffee on the porch of my modest home in Cedar Falls, Iowa, watching the leaves turn amber and gold. Retirement had been kind to me. No more late-night stakeouts, no more crime scene photos haunting my dreams, no more families looking to me for answers I couldn't give. Just peace, quiet, and the occasional fishing trip with my grandson. Then my phone rang. The voice on the other end was trembling, desperate. It was Margaret Chen, a 45-year-old accountant from my neighborhood. Her 19-year-old daughter Emma had vanished without a trace 5 days earlier. The local police had classified it as a voluntary missing person case, assuming she'd run off with some boy or was rebelling against her parents. But Margaret knew better. Emma wasn't that type of kid. Now, normally, I would have offered some comforting words and encouraged her to trust the system. After all, I was retired. This wasn't my responsibility anymore. But something in Margaret's voice, the raw terror of a mother who knew her child was in danger, awakened something inside me that I thought had died with my career. I agreed to meet her. Margaret lived 4 blocks away in a tidy 2-story house with a white picket fence. When she opened the door, I saw the hollow look I'd witnessed 1,000 times before, the look of someone whose world had been shattered overnight. Her husband David stood behind her, his face pale and drawn. These weren't parents dealing with a rebellious teenager. These were people staring into an abyss. Emma had left for her part-time job at the local bookstore on Thursday morning and never arrived. Her car was found in the parking lot of Morrison Park, the same park where I used to take my own kids when they were young. The keys were still in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat, her phone dead on the dashboard. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no leads. She had simply vanished. The investigating officer, Detective Sarah Walsh, was competent but overwhelmed. Cedar Falls wasn't exactly a hotbed of criminal activity, and disappearances like this were rare. She'd followed the standard procedures, checked Emma's social media, interviewed her friends, searched the obvious places. But after 5 days, the trail was growing cold. I knew that feeling. I'd been there before, staring at a case that seemed impossible to crack, watching precious hours tick by while someone's life hung in the balance. The difference was, I'd never learned to accept defeat. That evening, I drove to Morrison Park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. I stood where Emma's car had been found, trying to see what the initial investigation might have missed. Parks are transitional spaces, places where people come and go without much notice. Perfect for someone who wanted to remain invisible. I walked the perimeter, studying the terrain. The park bordered a wooded area that stretched for miles, with several hiking trails winding through the trees. If someone had taken Emma, they would have needed privacy and time. The woods offered both. As I was about to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Security cameras, 3 of them, positioned at different angles around the park. But according to the police report, they weren't functioning. All 3 had mysteriously malfunctioned the week before Emma's disappearance. Coincidence? In my 30 years of police work, I'd learned that coincidences were usually just crimes waiting to be solved. The next morning, I called the park's maintenance department. The cameras had been sabotaged, their wiring carefully cut in a way that wouldn't be immediately obvious. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had deliberately disabled the surveillance system in preparation for something. I spent the next 2 days retracing Emma's last known movements. She'd been a creature of habit, following the same route to work every day. She stopped at the same coffee shop, took the same shortcut through downtown, parked in the same section of the bookstore's lot. Predictable routines are a predator's best friend. At the coffee shop, I struck up conversations with the regular customers, the early morning crowd who would have been there when Emma made her final stop. Most remembered her, a quiet girl who always ordered the same drink and rarely spoke to anyone. But one customer, an elderly man named Harold, mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. For the past month, Harold had noticed a man in a dark sedan who seemed to arrive shortly after Emma each morning. The man would order coffee but never drink it, always leaving right after Emma did. Harold had found it odd, but hadn't thought much of it until I started asking questions. I had my first real lead. Someone had been stalking Emma Chen. The investigation took on new urgency. I reached out to my old contacts in the department, calling in favors and accessing resources that technically weren't available to a retired detective. But sometimes you have to break a few rules to save a life. We pulled traffic camera footage from the route Emma took to work. It took hours of painstaking review. But we found him, a dark blue sedan, license plate partially obscured, following Emma's white Honda at a distance. The car appeared in footage from multiple days, always maintaining the same careful distance. Running the partial plate through the system yielded 12 possible matches. One stood out immediately. The car belonged to Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old drifter with a history of assault charges and a recent move to Cedar Falls. He'd been in town for exactly 6 weeks, just long enough to establish Emma's routine. But finding Webb proved more challenging than expected. The address on his registration was a dead end, a rundown motel where he'd stayed for only 3 days before disappearing. The trail went cold again, and I felt the familiar frustration of being one step behind a dangerous criminal. Then I remembered something from my years working missing persons cases. Predators often return to their hunting grounds. They become comfortable in familiar territory, especially when they think they've gotten away with something. Morrison Park wasn't just where Emma had disappeared. It was where Webb felt safe. I began conducting surveillance on the park, something I hadn't done in years. My old bones weren't built for sitting in a car for hours, but I was driven by something stronger than physical discomfort. Every day that passed was another day Emma might be suffering, another day her family lived in agony. On the 4th night of my surveillance, I saw him. The dark sedan pulled into the parking lot at 11:47 p.m. Marcus Webb stepped out, a tall, lean man with nervous energy and constantly moving eyes. He walked to the exact spot where Emma's car had been found, stood there for several minutes, then disappeared into the woods. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The woods were dark and treacherous, filled with roots and branches that threatened to trip me with every step. But I'd trained for situations like this for 3 decades, and muscle memory took over. Webb led me deeper into the woods than I'd expected, following a barely visible trail that wound through the trees for over a mile. Eventually, we reached a small clearing where an old hunting cabin sat in decay. The structure was falling apart, its windows boarded up, but I could see light flickering through the cracks. I had found Emma's prison. The smart thing would have been to call for backup, to let the professionals handle the rescue. But I knew that by the time help arrived, Webb might panic and do something irreversible. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and act on incomplete information. I circled the cabin, looking for the best approach. The front door was secured with a heavy chain and padlock, but the back of the structure had a window that was partially broken. I could see inside, and what I saw made my blood boil. Emma was there, alive, but clearly traumatized. She was bound to a chair in the center of the room, her clothes dirty and torn. Webb stood over her, pacing and muttering to himself. He was agitated, unstable, and dangerous. I had to act fast. Using my phone, I called Detective Walsh and gave her my location, whispering urgently into the device. Then I turned off the phone and prepared to do what I'd been trained to do for 30 years. I was going to save a life. The broken window provided just enough space for me to slip inside. At 70 years old, I wasn't as agile as I used to be, but desperation gave me strength. I landed inside the cabin as quietly as possible, my service weapon drawn. Webb spun around, his eyes wide with surprise and rage. He'd been caught, and he knew it. In his hand was a knife, its blade gleaming in the flickering candlelight. "You shouldn't have come here, old man," he snarled, raising the weapon. "Now I'll have to kill you both." But I'd been in situations like this before. I'd faced down armed criminals, talked suicidal individuals off ledges, and made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Age hadn't dulled those instincts. "Marcus, let's talk about this," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You're trapped here. The police are on their way. Your only chance is to surrender peacefully." He laughed, a sound devoid of sanity. "I've been planning this for months. Do you think I don't have an escape route? Do you think I haven't thought this through?" That's when I noticed the gasoline cans in the corner of the room. Webb wasn't just planning to escape. He was planning to burn the evidence, including Emma and now me. The negotiation was over. I'd like to say what happened next was heroic, but the truth is it was messy and terrifying. Webb lunged at me with a knife, and I fired my weapon. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the knife flying across the room. He crashed into a pile of old furniture, blood spreading across his shirt. Emma was screaming, the sound echoing through the cabin like a siren. I rushed to untie her, my hands shaking with adrenaline and age. She was dehydrated and weak, but she was alive. That's all that mattered. Webb was groaning on the floor, clutching his wounded shoulder. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the reality of his situation. He was finished, and he knew it. The sound of sirens filled the air as Detective Walsh and her team arrived. They found us in the cabin, Emma free and Webb in custody. The nightmare was over, but the real victory came later, when I saw Emma reunited with her parents. The hollow look in Margaret's eyes was replaced by tears of joy and relief. David wrapped his arms around his daughter like he would never let her go again. These were the moments that had made my career worthwhile, the moments that reminded me why I'd become a cop in the first place. The case made headlines across Iowa. "Retired detective solves missing person case," read the local paper. But I didn't do it for the recognition. I did it because when someone cries out for help, you answer. Age doesn't change that responsibility. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 25 years to life for kidnapping, assault, and a dozen other charges. During his trial, investigators uncovered evidence linking him to similar crimes in 3 other states. Emma's case had stopped a serial predator in his tracks. Emma recovered, though it took time. She changed schools, went to therapy, and slowly rebuilt her life. She sends me a card every Christmas, thanking me for giving her a future. Those cards mean more to me than any commendation I ever received during my active duty. The experience taught me that retirement doesn't mean the end of purpose. It just means finding new ways to serve and new ways to make a difference. I may not carry a badge anymore, but I still carry the skills, the instincts, and the determination that made me a good detective. 6 months after Emma's rescue, I started a consulting business, offering my services to families dealing with missing persons cases. I work with local law enforcement, sharing knowledge and experience that can't be taught in any academy. I've helped solve 4 more cases since then, each one a reminder that evil doesn't retire, so neither can those who fight it. People often ask me if I miss the excitement of active police work. The truth is, I don't miss the politics, the paperwork, or the bureaucracy. But I do miss the satisfaction of bringing justice to those who need it most. That's why I continue to work, why I can't fully step away from the life I've lived for 7 decades. The case of Emma Chen reminded me that heroes aren't defined by their age or their official status. They're defined by their willingness to act when others won't, to stand up when others sit down, to fight when others surrender. At 70 years old, I learned that my most important case wasn't behind me. It was waiting in the shadows, testing whether I still had the courage to answer when duty called. And I did answer. I always will. Because somewhere out there, another Emma is waiting to be saved. Another family is praying for help, and another predator is planning his next move. As long as I draw a breath, I'll be ready to meet that challenge head on. That's not just what I did for 30 years as a detective. That's who I am, badge or no badge, retired or not. Some callings don't end with a pension. They end when you do.